Hey guys, welcome to this episode of Unearth Horticulture. Today we are in the greenhouse. As you can see, I have all kinds of beautiful pansies and greens and herbs. I even have my peppers and tomatoes all transplanted and rooting in the back of the greenhouse. And on this March day, I thought, since the bus is getting ready to go out this weekend, it'd be the perfect opportunity to talk to you about indoor herb gardening and how you can use this time of year as a season extender for your herbs. And so I have picked out some pansies and some herbs, and we're going to take these to my house and discuss a little bit more about how you can be successful with caring for your herbs this time of year. All right, let's go. It is so important when you are growing indoor herbs to have an end goal in mind. If you are choosing to grow herbs indoors as a year-round hobby, like they are going to be indoors for their entire life, just keep in mind that you need really good light support, and some people have good sunrooms or attached greenhouses to their homes that stay above freezing. Those are exactly the kind of places that you can grow herbs year-round, or if you have a good grow light. But a lot of people don't always have the best lighting for indoor herb growing. And so I like to think about it in a practical way, more so towards having the goal of season extension. So thinking about starting your herbs earlier than if you were to start them outdoors in April. You can go about a month earlier. And then also on the back end of the season in October, when we're expecting that first average frost, you can bring your herbs indoors in their containers and keep them going for another 1 to 2 months in your home. So that's more of how I think about indoor herb care, more so than having them in the home long-term year-round, because I know that my house is shaded by a huge tree and it's just not practical to have my herbs indoors throughout the season. And so having that goal in mind of whether you're going to have your herbs indoors forever until they die, or if you're going to have your herbs, use your indoor herb growing as more of a season extender. Those are two very different ways to tend your herbs, and so it's very important to have that goal in mind because it will change how you do indoor herb growing. So in this video, we are going to discuss the practical version of indoor herb growing for most growers, which is season extension. Let's talk about the plant material that I have here that I've chosen from the greenhouse for you. There are very specific things that you want to look for when you're choosing what herbs to start indoors in March time before things get going outdoors. I look for annual herbs that are best used fresh in recipes. You don't want to use them as much dried. They lose a lot of their flavor when they're dried or freeze dried. Herbs like basil and dill, they're so much better fresh because the plants are structured genetically to hold on to their flavor, the oils in their juices when they're used fresh. So I like to look for that from a culinary perspective, but also it's important to look for plants that are genetically more lenient towards growing in a container so that you can have them growing in a container for the whole growing season. So in my plant roster, I grow Everleaf Emerald Tower basil. This one's very well suited to a container because it grows more up than out. Fernleaf dill is a new one for me this year. This is a compact, slow to bolt dill that is intended for container use. I am so excited to give that a go. It's already looking so much better in a container than my other varieties of dill. Ducat is my typical dill variety I offer on the bus. Parsley, Giant of Italy, is a favorite of mine. It's really best used fresh. I also have a couple of herbs that tend to take over if they're not in a container. So like your summer savory, it's actually an annual, so it will die back every year, but it's a huge herb. And very fast growers. This is a new one for me, so we're going to see how it does in a container versus in ground. Mint is one of those herbs I strongly suggest growing in a container to keep it from taking over your garden because it is perennial. I start it early as a season extender because it is very soft growth tissue, and mint is so much better fresh than dried. I don't even think there's a comparison. If you know, you know. So to get this one going early, because it loves the warmth, it's in that basil mint family, I start this one early indoors. And then also thyme and oregano, these are warm season lovers. Common thyme is perennial here in south central Kansas, but it doesn't have a lot of its lush growth going until later in the season. So it's one of those that I'm on the edge of starting early or not. Personally, I wouldn't, but a lot of people that don't have mint going in their yards yet, that's a great one. It is okay to use dried. It's just a little bit tougher and can get stuck in the teeth. So some people prefer to use it for texture purposes, fresh rather than dried. And some recipes call for it fresh. So hey, why not? You got all these others, might as well start the thyme too. And then oregano, it is definitely a warm season herb, similar to rosemary. It doesn't always make it through the cold winters in Kansas. It sometimes can, but oftentimes not. It especially hates the moisture of snow sitting on it over the winter. So I've never had it actually overwinter here in Kansas. So I like to start that one as well early. So that's kind of my roster of herbs that I start in March in my home just to get them going, especially if you've got that gardener's itch. But there are others. The things to think about with what herbs you want to get going early are, do they prefer the warm season? Like, do they really only get going towards May? Those are the kind of herbs you want to start. And then any herbs that you prefer to use fresh in recipes rather than dried. Those are also the herbs that you want to get going. So we've talked about plants. Let's talk about containers. When you buy an herb from me on the plant bus, it comes in a cup size, volume size container, and it comes with a plant care QR code. And they're very definitely well rooted into this container. I in no way intend for you to grow your herbs on in this pot size for much longer than a week or two. So it is really important for you to upsize your plants when you purchase them, especially from me, because believe it or not, herbs use water indoors much faster than you would think. A lot of times we're used to that weekly check with our houseplants. Houseplants actually use water fairly slowly. It depends on the houseplant, but in comparison to herbs that are producing lots of foliage very rapidly, these are they're gonna use water a little bit faster than you're used to with your houseplants. So it's important to go up in proportion to their water use in container size. So what I mean by that is herbs that are like it drier, like your thyme and your oregano, rosemary, things like that, your more Mediterranean herbs, those herbs are going to only need a slight increase in pot size because they're a little bit slower in their water use. Herbs like dill and basil and mint, they are going to use water so fast because they're going to put on some decent growth in your home. So going into a container size that sometimes even triple their original container size and volume is not necessarily a bad idea. It helps you stay ahead of watering because I've killed my fair share of indoor herbs by simply letting them dry out because sometimes we forget about them. They're often in our brightest light conditions in our homes that we have, that we can muster. And so they're going to be going through that water pretty quickly. So I am going to go into this container size for my dill and basil. And then I'm also going to go into a smaller container size, just a 4-inch diameter standard grow pot for these. You might say, hey, Renata, those grow pots are going to leak water all over my house. Well, if you know me, you know that I love the cash pot system. Indoor containers, in my opinion, should all have no drainage holes because they allow you to keep your plants in a grow pot that corresponds in size and just drop them down in there, kind of like a glorified saucer. I use this method, the system, for my houseplants. I also use them for my indoor herbs because guess what? When we get to April time or May time and you want to move your indoor herbs outside, you can just pop this out of your beautifully, probably more expensive indoor grow pot and move them into, either repot them into a larger container like a terracotta pot or a glazed pot for outdoors with drainage, or you can drop this into another container outside. These have the best drainage. They allow you to check roots. There's just so many benefits to growing on in grow pots, in nursery pots, rather than growing on in a pot with drainage indoors. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use a pot with drainage, but I do recommend using something with a glazing on the outside, because again, with the water use, if you have something porous like terracotta, it's going to run, the plants are going to run through the water very quickly. They're going to get zapped of their moisture. So I always recommend cache pots for whatever plants you're growing indoors, because it is the most flexible method of growing. All right, so check out this dill. You see all those roots? That is why it needs the larger container. Because I know someone's gonna ask what kind of potting mix I'm using, I'm going to tell you it is my greenhouse's general purpose potting mix. It's just a standard peat and perlite mix. And so basically Miracle-Gro, but without any of the added fertilizer. And the reason I don't like having added fertilizer in my potting mix is because I like to control that aspect of my growing, because sometimes I'm planting houseplants and they need a lower rate and a different balance of fertilizer than dill does. So a zero fertilizer potting mix that's general purpose, that works just great. If you only have Miracle-Gro on hand, that's fine too. Just keep in mind you might not need to add fertilizer when you're growing on, which is actually our next topic after I stop yapping and get this planted. So I have potted up this dill. It's looking fluffy and nice. I stuck its little care tag in the pot. You don't have to, but I do recommend keeping your care tag like in a drawer nearby or something, so that you can reference this when you need to, when you maybe move it outside, or if something pops up and you have a question about your plant, like what variety it is, so that you can buy it next year. Those tags are good to keep a hold of. I am definitely a tag hoarder. That is just a prerequisite for horticulturists, for gardeners. But I recommend at this point fertilizing. So what are you going to use? There are really two methods of fertilizing that I use on a regular basis. There is the constant liquid feed, which is where you take like a powder type fertilizer at a concentrated rate and you mix it into your water that you're watering with every time you water, or every other time you water, depending on what your method is there. Miracle-Gro is an example. You can also get a myriad of other brands that are all-purpose fertilizers or rated for vegetable and herb use. You can also get fertilizers labeled for that. I am a big believer in using fertilizers and chemicals as recommended on their labels, because those labels are heavily regulated, especially by the FDA if it's something you are consuming. So on that note, Osmocote, labeled for flower and vegetable. This is a 14-14-14 NPK rate, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And I use this Osmocote, the slow release pelleted fertilizer, in everything that I have to personally take care of, because I am a lazy grower, and I tell people this and they think it's hilarious. But the point is that you do this one time with this about every 3 months. You can also do it about every 6 months with the pink bottle, which is like the flower version. It's a little higher rate fertilizer, and I use that one on my houseplants at a diluted ratio. It's just a different thing. Anyways, they come with this little scoop. I use a 1/4 teaspoon because a little bit goes a long ways. You can use a capful every 4 square feet if you're using this in the garden, which I don't usually do that with something that comes in a bottle this size, because that wouldn't go very far. But I use usually a 1/4 to a 1/2 teaspoon of this in my herb containers when they run between a 4-inch and a 6-inch pot size. And then I just sprinkle it in and kind of work it into the top inch so it doesn't float out of the pot when I'm watering the first time, especially. And then I water it in, and then for 3 months that plant is fertilized, and I don't have to actually mix fertilizer in my kitchen sink where it could splash onto, utensils that I'm putting in my mouth. I just don't want to ingest fertilizer if I don't have to. So slow release fertilizer I find is a little bit safer for indoor growing, and it's great for the lazy grower. So fertilized, it's planted into a larger container that's going to help you stay ahead of watering. And then all that's left to do is find a good sunny spot for this, even though it's not as sunny as you would want. Maybe for year-round growing, it's plenty of sun to get it going. Let's talk about harvesting. Once you start to see new shoot growth take place on your plant, and that usually happens about 1 to 2 weeks after you transplant and move it into your home environment, once you start to see that new growth, you can start to maybe take snips and harvest off of your plant. The trick is not to take too much, because if you take more than 50% of your plant, it's not going to be able to promote new growth as rapidly. So make sure you give your plant time to establish. Usually that's about 2 weeks. And then before you know it, your plant's going to be ready to move outdoors for the season. Before I forget, I also wanted to talk about my pansies here, my little pansy window box. I sell these. I started selling them last year, and they are such a huge hit, and here's why. Pansies are a great flower to enjoy during the coolest parts of our grow season. So in March, they can take a light freeze down to like, I'd say 26-ish degrees, 26 to 28 degrees. So if we're getting light freezes, or if we're having beautiful weeks like this, these pansies are going to be thriving. So I plant these oval window boxes for you to have to enjoy this part of the year. I put mine out on my front porch right now this time of year, and then I can, if we have a deep Kansas weird freeze late in the season, I can quick pull it inside for the night. So these ovals are really handy for that. I've even grown them indoors similar to herbs as a season extender. They're just not as floriferous. So it's something to keep in mind, because my pansies are also edible. I don't spray them with anything that you can't eat. So you can use them as dessert plate garnishes. If you're having a tea party, you can put them in your salads. You can sugar them for desserts, like to put on the desserts on like a cupcake. I also like to put them in drinks because they make it just that much more enjoyable. So indoor herbs, pansies, there's just so much you can do right now to enjoy gardening, even though our last average frost hasn't happened yet. If you have any questions, as always, drop them in the comments below. And until next time, you've been watching Unearth Horticulture.